So I wanted to respond to Friended because we had a hangout yesterday. I watched the hangout afterwards. I know he watched the hangout as well, and it's then you get to pick apart a few of these things and maybe look at some of the things that you needed to look at or needed to expand on. And there was just 2 questions I had for him. Admittedly, this video is a little bit of an excuse to allow me to use my new webcam, and thank you to my patrons for affording me the ability to buy that a Logitech 4K Brio. I won't be recording in 4K, but I will be recording in 1080 at 60 frames a second, which should make a big difference when the chroma key is up, you know, because I wave my hands around, and that's not really very useful when you're recording at 720p and 30 frames a second in terms of keying the background out. So 2 things that I wanted to mention to Friended, really, questions or sort of points that I wanted to make a little bit differently. If you didn't see that hangout, it's a long hangout, it's a couple of hours long, but I thought it was quite a good hangout watching it back, actually, and it was discussing anti-theism. I was defending anti-theism, and generally the claim it boiled down to was that religion does more harm than good. He was suggesting the opposite, that religion does more good than harm. So the first thing was that he said that I had the burden of proof to show that it does more harm than good. I objected to that on the grounds that I didn't think it was a case of a burden of proof, but it's a preponderance of evidence. So I have a burden on me to make the case that it does more harm than good, as he has the burden to make the case that it does more good than harm. But I propose that effectively we're both starting from the same position and we're evaluating it on a preponderance of evidence. And that conversation really never developed. I could have done with talking about that for a couple of minutes more. But the question that I wanted to address to Friended with relation to that was that I said that I thought that he was setting me an impossible goal. He was asking me to evidence something that I couldn't evidence, which was to evidence objectively that it's doing more harm than good, because I don't think that's something that you can do. I think it's ultimately a subjective decision that we're both making. We both agreed that religion brought to the table some goods and it brought to the table some harms. But even if we just winnow it down to 1 good and 1 harm, it just seems like we're still evaluating apples versus oranges and we haven't got a conversion factor. I know that Friended talked about social capital. That was an important thing to him. And I agreed with him that religion brings social capital. I had some doubts as to whether it's really as necessary in modern Western societies. We have structures that replace some of those needs for social capital, and we bring structures together, social structures that give us some of the cohesiveness that we still benefit from as apes, as social apes, if you take the religion out of the equation. But let's just say that even accounting for that there's still a net gain in social capital with religion, okay? But how do you quantify that? I don't think you can. What are the units of social capital? There isn't one, is there? Let's come up with one, just for the sake of this somewhat ludicrous example. But it's a ludicrous example because I think it's a ludicrous question, frankly. So let's call it the group hug, and let's say that Anglicanism gives us 6 group hugs as a society, and evangelicalism, because it's more cohesive and people take it more seriously and they're more devout and there's more meetings and all this kind of stuff, gives us 12 group hugs. Okay, what does that tell us? Well, we need to set that against a harm, so let's just have 1 harm. And I brought to the table this idea that that deference to irrationality is effectively what we have with religion. We give deference to religion and the irrationality within it. We value faith. We value a level of belief greater than that which the evidence alone would lead us to. And it's given us a deference to irrationality, which I regarded as a harm, and I don't recall Friended disagreeing with that. If you do disagree with that, Friended, just take that bit out and put in one of the things that you did regard as a harm, because you accepted that there were harms. How do we quantify that? I'm saying it's a harm, you're agreeing it's a harm, but we can't quantify that harm. There's no units for that harm. Let's give it a unit. Let's call it the faith head. And let's say there's 20 faith heads. You know, we've got, I don't know, Anglicanism gives us 6 group hugs on the one side and 20 faith heads. But what's the conversion factor? You know, there isn't one, is there? You'd need a conversion factor if we're rounding it up of 4 to 1, and I need a conversion factor of 3 to 1 or less. It's ludicrous, isn't it? We can't evaluate these two things because they're so different things. We could both agree that one of them's a harm and one of them's a good, but it's a subjective judgment as to how we value these two different things. You could start talking about things and say, well, a good for society leads to the society lasting longer. And we could say that Stalinism wasn't a good because it didn't last, it's not lasted. Would Stalinism be any better? Would it be more of a good for society if Stalinism was still on the go? In a way, I would say the opposite is true, that Stalinism was a malevolent and horrible ideology, and the fact that it didn't last very long was a bonus, quite frankly. So I don't think that you can evaluate it. That's a subjective judgment to give something like that. Any kind of metric you do give is a subjective judgment. So it seemed to me, one, that you'd set me in an impossible task. You're expecting me to objectively evidence something which is a subjective evaluation on my part and on your part, and you're expecting me to do something that you couldn't actually do yourself because you can't put objective values on these things yourself. So that's the first thing that I'd be interested in your thoughts on. And the second was that you talked about religion and attitudes, and I said things such as homosexuality, for example, and religious attitudes to homosexuality tends to be against homosexuality, and you said, well, no, there's a correlation there, but correlation doesn't equal causation, which is true. The thing that people usually do in those circumstances, which is what you did, you played the game, you gave an alternative hypothesis. That's playing the game, that's what you're supposed to do in these circumstances. And the alternative hypothesis you gave is something that I've been thinking about, really. You know, you have a debate like that and you're focused on the things that you want to say and you don't always fully mull over what the other person was saying, and sometimes you let things go and afterwards you think, I wish I hadn't quite let that go in the way that I did. And what you were saying was that effectively, as I understand it, you're saying that people intuit a position with regard to homosexuality, and so what will happen is people will intuitively feel that homosexuality is wrong. It's not the religion informing them. They intuitively feel that, so they're drawn to a religious belief that flatters these intuitive preconceptions. And I just think that's an absolute load of bollocks, quite honestly. I just don't think that it works like that. It's almost as if you've got a couple of people stood there, you know, and one of them saying, you know, I just have this feeling in my bones that homosexuality is wrong and abortion. I just don't think abortion's right, quite frankly. So I think I'm probably going to become a Catholic or a Muslim. And the guy next to him says, yeah, do you know, I've never really had a problem with homosexuality or with abortion, but do you know, I'm looking out over that field and there's some cows over there. I've always felt there's something a little bit fucking sacred about those great big mooing bastards, you know. So maybe Hinduism's for me. Maybe that's what I'm going to be drawn to. I mean, it just doesn't work like that, does it? Devout Muslim parents aren't bringing their children up going, do you know, have a listen to Richard Dawkins, have a listen to what he has to say, have a listen to this Sikh guy, right? This is what the Christians have to, we don't want to influence you, right? Have a little look at the Quran, but set it alongside all these other things. The most important thing for you, Hanif, is that you make up your own mind and that we don't put our preconceptions and our religious pre-commitments onto you. And then when little Hanif gets to 18 years old, his parents say to him, okay, now you need to decide for yourself, and we're not going to judge you for it. We're not going to hold you against it. If you want to be a Muslim, that's great. But if you want to be a Sikh or a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew, if you want to be a Jew, that's fine by us. If you want to be an atheist, right? We've no issue with that whatsoever, and we hope we've not we've not influenced your thinking in any way, shape or form. It just doesn't work like that, does it? People are Muslims with Muslim beliefs because their parents were Muslims. They're Christians with Christian beliefs because their parents were Christians. They're Hindus with Hindu beliefs because their parents were Hindus. Even atheists, I can show you the stats that demonstrate this. That the rise in the religiosity has come from Anglicanism largely. Why? Because that is the weakest form. Most Anglicans in the UK don't take their religion very seriously. So even with atheism, they're not getting drawn equally from these groups. People who have strong Muslim parents are still by and large Muslims. Strong Christian parents are still by and large Christians. Right. So I just didn't get that people are just using their intuition as adults. Maybe they are, but they're using intuition as adults, having been brought up in these strong religious households and having these things, these viewpoints indoctrinated into them by their parents. I don't know how you can just kind of ignore that fact. So I didn't, maybe I was missing something from your explanation there, but it seemed as if we're all living in this sort of marvellous utopian world where we all just arrive as adults without any kind of cultural influences that religion can impose upon us or anything else can impose upon us, and then we just use this kind of innate intuition that we were born with, that's just pre-committing us to these different ideas and then picking and choosing off the shelf the religion that matches those beliefs. And frankly, that just comes across as a load of hogwash. Okay, interested to know what you think about that. Thank you for watching, and bye for now. That's my line.